Hilary Greene rolled over in bed, looked out of the porthole window onto the canal bank beyond, and blinked lazily in the mid-August sun. A glance at her watch told her that it wasn't yet 7 o'clock, so she allowed herself the luxury of a stretch for a few moments before climbing out of the narrow bed. Yawning, she stood up and walked a bare step to her wardrobe, where she ran a critical eye over the tiny space and the mostly sombre work-orientated suits that hung there. Surely on a summer's day, when you were going back to work after a fortnight's holiday, you could be forgiven for donning a colourful summer dress. Or maybe not. Her lips pulled into a small smile as she contemplated her boss's reaction if she walked into Thames Valley Police headquarters dressed like someone from an M&S advert. Detective Superintendent Stephen Crail would probably be delighted. Then again, she had just spent the first week of her holiday with him on board the Mollern, her narrowboat home, cruising around the Gloucestershire Canal system. The weather had been good, and they'd managed to avoid most of the usual tourist spots, in between testing out the limits of the small confines of her bed. Yes, Stephen might be happy to see her arrive for work dressed in something more feminine, but professionalism, even for a now retired and still very much ex-detective inspector, was too ingrained in her for her to give in to temptation. Instead, she reached for a pale beige skirt and jacket combo, and made do with a multicoloured blouse in gemstone colours to mark the lovely summer's day outside. Habit had her in and out of her minuscule shower in 3 minutes flat, and after a sparse breakfast of brown bread toast and 3 cups of coffee, she stepped off the boat with a definite spring in her step. Slinging her large black leather bag over her shoulder, she walked along the towpath to where Puff the tragic wagon was parked in his usual spot in the neighbouring pub's car park. As she unlocked the car door, she thought she could just distinguish the first hint of autumn's approach. There was that slight coolness in the early morning air, and the house martins skimming the canal had that frantic look about them that told her they were desperate to see their second brood fledged. Her mind went back briefly to that moment some time ago when she'd been standing in almost this very spot and had been dragged off into the bushes by a man holding a knife to her throat, but she refused to let the image linger. That was all sorted and didn't need any rehashing. With a mental shrug, she opened up the car and got in. Puff, a somewhat ancient Volkswagen Golf, started after his usual nominal grumble, and from the tiny hamlet of Thrupp, the commute into Kidlington on the outskirts of Oxford took her barely 5 minutes. As she was idling at one of the many sets of traffic lights that Kidlington had to offer its happy motorists, her mind was still on her final week's holiday. Because Stephen had only been due 1 week's leave, she'd spent last week abroad on her own, in a pleasant little mountainous spot in northern Spain's Basque region, where the tourists were few and the frogs were many. The amphibians, that is, not the French. Her nights had been serenaded by so much chirruping, croaking, and singing by the nocturnal males that by the time she'd become used to the racket and could get a full night's sleep, it had been time to come home.